So I'm here with Tim Daw. You are an associate professor in sustainability science at Stockholm Resilience Center at Stockholm University. You're also project coordinator for the very first Swedish Climate Citizens Assembly, one of the founding fathers of this beautiful assembly. And it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
So Tim, who constitute Medborgarrådet för klimatet, the Swedish Citizens Assembly, and what will they do?
Okay, so the members, the 60 participants that were selected, they are a group of people who live in Sweden who reflect, even though there are only 60 people, they kind of reflect the diversity of Swedish society. And they were also randomly selected. So anyone who's, we selected 7,000 names from the National Register at random. So everyone who lives in Sweden had the same likelihood of getting a letter. They were sent a letter saying, do you want to be part of this? And nearly 500 people responded and said, yes, I want to come and be part of the Medborgarrådet, the Climate Assembly. And they also answered a short survey, and so that we were then able to use an algorithm to select a group of people who reflect the broader Swedish society in terms of their age, their gender, where they live in the country, their political opinions, and how much they worry about the climate question. And because we got such a great response, we were able to almost perfectly match the Swedish society in all those variables. So this group of people who are meeting here today, it's like a mini Sweden. It's the most representative mini Sweden that you'll ever have the chance to meet.
It's this the average Joe Sweden. I don't know the average Eric and Anna.
But I mean, not just the average, also
the outliers.
You see a very diverse group of people here, which is super exciting.
So what are you trying to achieve with Medborgarrådet för klimatet?
Okay, we're trying to we're trying to contribute to a more nuanced and richer public and political discussion about how Sweden should address the climate challenge. So we have, it's a very complex question, and there's a lot of scientific nuances, but it's also a question that everyone has a different opinion of. Everyone has different lifestyle or experiences, affects them in different ways. So how do we find a way of sort of having a conversation which involves the broader population, but that also is able to deal with these deep questions where you've really got to spend a lot of time deliberating. So this Climate Assembly framework allows people to come. They're going to be together for 39 hours, listening to one another, getting to know each other's opinions, weighing up scientific evidence, weighing up different sources of information and the pros and cons of different suggestions. And ultimately, they will see what this diverse group thinks are good suggestions for how Sweden should address its international obligations on climate, but also more importantly than that, why they think that. Why were they able to come to agreement that this is a good suggestion or it's not a good suggestion? And it's those reasonings and this deep thinking that people are doing that can hopefully support the broader debate and help the difficult discussion that we need to have as a nation in Sweden. This mini Sweden can hopefully show the way on how we can discuss these issues in a more constructive way.
And how did you go about this? What's like the secret recipe here?
The secret recipe, I would say, is this unique way of selecting people, this random selection, and then using the algorithm to end up with a group that captures that diversity. Not just people who care about the climate, and not just people who vote for the Green Party, but actually people who actually vote for all the different parties. So we asked people in the little survey, if there was an election today, who would you vote for? And there was about 18% who said, I'm not sure, I don't want to say. But then of the other people, we were able to match the proportions of people who support the different parties with the party's actual support in the parliament, the actual presence in the parliament. So this is one example of the ways in which we try to match the broader population.
But you mentioned that it's a really complex issues and it cut across every sector in society, really. Yes. So how do you kind of cherry pick, or how do you kind of choose the focus? I guess you have to, and how do you tackle that complexity and the need to inform the the participants?
Yeah, this is a really good question, of course, because, climate change affects all aspects of our lives, and the decisions we make to try and address climate change also affects lots of different people in lots of different ways. So, and internationally, climate assemblies have been happening over the last sort of 5 years in Europe in lots of different countries, and sometimes they try to cover the whole issue, or they have a day on transport and a day on housing, and then energy, and then agriculture. And what we're starting with a broad picture of the climate issue, so that we capture that fact that it's complex and connected to different parts of society. But then, so that's this weekend. We're talking more generally about climate, about Swedish emissions, where they come from. And then when we move to the Thursday evening sessions, they'll be hearing speakers who are talking specifically about transportation. And the reason we've chosen, sort of suggesting this focus on transportation, is because it's very significant for Sweden's emissions. It's also an extremely difficult, politically contested question here in Sweden. And it's something that we all have our own individual experience of, depending on where we live and how we travel, where we go to work, etc. So for these three reasons, the transportation, we think, is a good topic for the citizens to really get to dig into in more detail.
So some perhaps would say that we already have a citizens' assembly in Sweden. It's called Swedish Riksdagen, or the parliament. What is your response there? Why do we need this?
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. So I guess I would say this. So the first reason is that parliaments don't actually generally reflect the diversity of society in terms of their demographics or their education levels. And so that's a big difference. Secondly, these people who are coming here are coming as individuals, and they have no party line that they have to defend. They don't have to win arguments and win votes. They're here, they can listen, they can change their mind. They can really say, oh, that's an interesting perspective that you're giving there. And I've changed my mind now. And that's something that's very difficult in a competitive political system where, the job of, it's necessary to compete for votes and to say perhaps sound bites which are really help in terms of getting the headline or winning the points. But these people are not trying to win any votes, and so they're completely free to explore the issue in a very open-minded way.
At the same time, this is not a philosophy seminar where, everyone gets educated and then goes home and it doesn't affect anything. So what about the implementation? What will the climate assemblies work lead to, hopefully?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that is really an unknown. So again, in the experience of climate assemblies around other countries, often they've actually been mandated by a government. So a government body or a parliament has said, we have this target, we want the citizens to give us good ideas of how we can meet that target.
This is not the case here.
This is not the case here. This is an independently organized climate assembly. So it's been initiated by a research project. So we have no mandate from the government. And that has both pros and cons. In some ways, you can say when the government mandates a process like this, they're sort of obliged to listen to the findings and maybe to take them more seriously and more likely to implement them. But I think what we've seen actually is that, of course, the findings are always then feed into a political process, and they're not just going to be implemented directly. And we've seen that, for example, in France. Even though President Macron launched the assembly, some of the recommendations did make their way to policy, but usually in a watered-down form, and many of them have never been taken up. But I think if you understand the impact of a climate assembly only through, well, what regulations were or what recommendations were made and were those implemented in policy, I think that's a very kind of narrow and naive understanding of the potential impact of this. This is an experiment in democracy, and that's why our ambition and our hope is that this enhances that democratic system, but also enhances the public and political debate. So adding nuance, arguments, allowing new voices to come in, independent voices that perhaps other citizens find more trustworthy than the voices that are usually heard from campaign groups or special interests.
If you'd be able to, if I'd ask you to draw that vision out even further, I mean, what would you like? What would you be your vision 2 years on, if this grows, what would a bigger climate assembly look like, and how would it operate?
So just if I was to speculate or dream, I would like to see, I think it would be fantastic if some of the insights that come from this deep discussion are picked up in the public discourse, that some of these, perhaps in new ways that they're not currently thought about in the public discourse. I would think it would be great if people could be inspired by, I think a lot of climate politics is driven, or a lot of thoughts about the climate is driven by politics, or even identity politics, or even the culture war that we talk about. And that's, of course, really, really unfortunate, because it's a serious issue that we all need to deal with seriously. So if people could look at the Climate Assembly here and say, oh, these are people who look like me, and it's interesting that they found this argument interesting, and be stimulated to say, oh, what do I think about that argument? So I think that would be a great outcome. And in the broader term, I also hope that this experience will be able to show how these processes can work, and that more people become aware of them, more people become enthusiastic about them, and we could maybe see them taking a larger role supporting our democracy. Certainly this group can't possibly solve all the questions about climate, how Sweden is going to respond to climate. So there will be lots of unanswered questions from here, and maybe there will be opportunities for other assemblies, for example, at the city level or regional level, or other national climate assemblies that are really going to try and crack particularly difficult issues. I would love to see that in the future. I think if this experiment shows that it works well, then I could imagine that more people could become interested in this. The process could generate more interest from different civil society organizations and politicians themselves.
Okay, thank you so much, Tim Daw, project coordinator at the Swedish Climate Assembly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.